Welcome to episode number 45 of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dillon. Thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully your week is going well so far. I know things are really crazy out there, so I've actually deferred from my normal every 2-week schedule, and I'm putting out a podcast today. Hopefully this catches you, gives you something to do if you're stuck at home in quarantine or self-isolation or something. I'll continue to try to produce more episodes. I have some ideas how to get more episodes out in the next coming weeks, so who knows how long we're going to be stuck in this bizarre situation, but if we are here for a while, hopefully I can provide some content for you guys to absorb while we're here. Throughout the weekend, obviously I had a little more time on my hands, and I binged the Netflix special Tiger King, or I think it's called Joe Exotic Tiger King. This was one of the most bizarre documentaries I've ever watched. It was really crazy. It's definitely worth watching to see how just crazy the world of big cat keeping in the United States is. And if you were listening to episode number 43, we had Jordan Jones on, who talks about Tim Stark's establishment called Wildlife in Need. And Tim Stark does actually have a few cameos in this and a few interviews. And you kind of see some things that he does there. So definitely worth checking out, and interesting that we had a connection to the actual podcast from episode 43. So if you have some time on your hands, definitely binge through that. Before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to remind you that Animals at Home is a supporter of the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy, and I do make donations to that charity usually every quarter or so based off of the income that I get from the podcast through YouTube as well as Amazon affiliate and whatnot. And if you do want to support them in an even larger way, definitely go check them out or go to animalsathome.ca/shop. You can buy yourself some Animals at Home merch, and $5 for every shirt does automatically get donated to the charity. Thank you very much to our sponsors, CustomReptileHabitats.com. Go check them out. Links are in the show notes in the description. It is an affiliate link, so if you do pick up something like a Miss King system or some substrate or some decor, or universal rock backgrounds and whatnot, a commission does come back to me, which of course helps support the show. On today's episode of the podcast, I'm chatting with Troy Goldberg, who goes by the same name on his YouTube channel, or you may be familiar with his Instagram account, ufraga_histrionica. Troy has one of the coolest reptile/amphibian rooms in the business. I think he is a dart frog hobbyist, and he's converted his garage into just an amazing dart frog room. Now, we talk about how he converted his garage, which I think maybe will be interest to some of you guys, because he took his regular garage and converted it into a perfectly good reptile room in Ohio. So it's not like he's in Florida dealing with perfect conditions. He's set up that room to be able to handle a fairly sensitive group of animals, dart frogs, and really enjoyed this conversation. If you are listening to it or watching it on YouTube, just know that his camera does turn on at about the 20-minute mark or so. So it does eventually turn on. So you'll be able to see his room. Really cool. And if you aren't watching, if you're just listening on the podcast, definitely go to his Instagram page or his YouTube so you can really see what the room looks like, as well as the instructional videos that he does put together. They're really incredible. And I have to say that the dart frog hobby, although I'm not a part of it, has always been really fascinating to me, because every time you see images of dart frog enclosures, the enrichment is always through the roof. They've always done these amazing, beautiful, natural enclosures. And so we had a conversation about that. I was really curious to see, is that a requirement for the species, or is that just something that the dart frog people are doing? So you might find the answer pretty interesting, and it sort of makes the reptile hobby realize, hey, we got to start pulling up our boots here and start doing a better job, because the dart frog hobby is really killing us in terms of just creating good, natural, enriching environments for their animals they're keeping, to the point where the dart frog people, and Troy does kind of explain this in the interview, they sort of eye roll at the term bioactive, because they've been doing it for so long. The fact that it's now becoming a buzzword is kind of a joke. So they sort of play with the term a little bit, and they're not making fun of the reptile people, although maybe some of them are. It's more like, hey, we've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, and this is just the way you should be caring for animals. So they sort of are laughing at the reptile people that we're just getting there now, which of course, better late than never, I guess. So anyway, you will enjoy this conversation. I love that we could branch out of the reptile world and talk about some dart frogs. Dart frogs are 100% on my wish list, and they will be on yours after listening to this. Here's my conversation with Troy. All right, well, Troy, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I think, well, first off, you were a listener, had reached out to me and asked if I could have you on the show, and I'm always trying to get those individuals on when I can. But secondly, I think you are the owner and the creator of one of the coolest and most visually appealing reptile/amphibian rooms out there. And it seems like you have a couple of different passions or talents that are blending together to make that happen. And I really want to jump into all of that with you. But first, did you have a passion for animals growing up as a kid, or did that sort of happen along the way? Did you have other things that were more passionate about when you were younger?
Sure. Yes, since I was a little kid, I always, growing up in Ohio, I'm born and raised here. I've never really left. So I used to love going in like little ravines and creeks and catching, leopard frogs, bullfrogs, crayfish, all that stuff. So I was always into nature. Um, and I remember being really, really young and seeing stuff in like, Encarta encyclopedias and stuff like that. And I'd see like poison dart frogs or red-eyed tree frogs, and I always was just so intrigued by them. And as I grew up and I started like, I think my dad brought me some a random tree frog home from work, and I was like, oh, cool. I guess I'll learn how to keep frogs. And then when I like found out you could actually keep dart frogs, or like I didn't think there was a possibility that you could actually own them. So then it became like it was over since then. So I started, right around when I was 15 or 16 when I actually started keeping them. But yeah, growing up, I loved fishing too. So I was always into nature and animals. Um, I don't know if it was a passion per se back then, but it was always just, when we were little kids, everyone just ran around outside, and that's kind of what I did. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of have the same sort of story in terms of living outside in nature and collecting animals and trying to keep them as pets for as as long as they stay alive type thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had an old swimming pool. It was like an above ground swimming pool, and it was broken down for years. And there was like a population of gray tree frogs that lived on in the underside of the railing and on the walls. And I mean, when I was a little kid, I would just constantly go out there and watch them at night and see them call back and forth. And they bred in there, and yeah, it was really cool. So that
Yeah,
was
the gray tree
my
frogs
first.
are awesome. We have those in this area too, and they're not as common. Like I found lots of wood frogs and whatnot, but the gray tree frog was always like that was the golden frog if you could find it outside.
Yeah, I find them, and people find them all the time. Like, hey, do you want this? I'm like, I'm not. I don't have their type of setup, but yeah, they're really cool. I was like, I would just let it go.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, I'm like, oh, I got to keep this thing. Just that's how it was. But yeah, they're really cool, and we're coming up probably in the next month and a half. It's just, I mean, all I'm surrounded by trees, and I mean, you can't even concentrate at night because it's just constant calling back and forth, which is really cool. And people are always like, "What is that noise?" I'm like, "Oh, that's a great tree frog." I mean, all my friends like none of them are into actual animals. So like, you're such a dork, man. I'm like, dude, it's cool. Like,
Yeah.
I just have fun with it. So
And those frogs actually change color too, right? They can go from a gray to like a lime green.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
so cool.
when they stretch out, they've got like orange in between their like
Right.
their joints meet and everything. They're really neat. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So was your first intro to the hobby then was a frog the first animal that you started keeping, or did you have a different animal that you started with?
Uh, well, I get, when I was really young, maybe 10, 8 or 10, um, we would, I don't even know if they're still around in Ohio anymore, but we would go in the creeks and stuff and ravines and also find, like little salamanders. And that was like, I guess the first tank I had. I like set up like a little slope. So they had like water area, land area. It was really, really, bootleg, I guess would be the best word for that. But
Yeah.
I guess that was the first animal I kept. But I don't think they survived very long, so it was a good failed attempt, I guess. But yeah, the first animals I kept successfully, my dad just brought me home. He's like, I think I was like 15. He brought me home a 10-gallon tank, and it was real, again, bootleg budget setup. But there was, I think I had a Cuban tree frog, and it's like a marsupial frog or something, but it's like a tiger leg walking frog. They have like vertical pupils. It was an interesting frog, but those are the first two I kept. I had those for about a year or two, and then I moved on to the red eyes and dart frogs and stuff. So
So yeah, I guess as a progression, the dart frog is going to be on the far side of the continuum in terms of difficulty. So you had a few years of easier frogs, I guess, before you jumped into them.
yeah, there was a pet store kind of close. Well, I guess it was about 30 minutes from me, and my local stores never really had anything like as far as they had Pac-Mans and stuff, but never anything real like exotic or anything. And then I went to this one store and they had red eyes, and then they also had a Aratus, and I was just like, I lost my mind. Like I was like, what? This is back in like 2000, and I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh, I have to get these. And so I got them both, and I had multiple tanks set up, and quickly realized I wasn't really into the red eyes. But being so, my background is art and painting, and So I painted a lot of red-eyed tree frog paintings, and they get into really cool poses and when they are awake. But as far as actually watching them, the red eyes were incredibly boring, as opposed to the dart frogs. And the Erotis are shy, but I was still really more drawn to them. So that's kind of how it progressed into that. So it was about a year and a half, 2 years with some of the easier frogs, just crickets and all that. And then I moved into the dart frogs. Yeah,
so once the dart frog started, I guess, did it just snowball from there?
yeah, it slowly did. My first, like I said, that pet store was the first ones I got as far as the Erotis go, and then I had that for a few years, and I didn't even do fruit flies then because no one. I mean, there was care sheets online, you could find, but I don't even remember if Dendroboard was really around then. So there was I think there was Frog Form, but I mean, I wasn't really using the internet to find out information back then. I mean, you just saw stuff for sale on King Snake or whatever. But So I was feeding it like little maggots and little tiny crickets I would find at the pet store for a couple of years. And then, so my dad is obviously he's in sales too. He's the start of our company. And he worked up in Buffalo as well. So Buffalo, you were from Youngstown, Ohio, but he worked in Buffalo, New York. And that's where Aaron Hanslick was from. And he was one of the, I guess, OG dart frog guys. And so we drove up there and picked up a bunch of I got some Azurius and green Cipollini. And that's kind of when it really started. And he's like, yeah, you got to do fruit flies and you want to do this and that. And he's telling me about Dendroboard. So that's where I started. That was around, that would have been like 03, 04, when I really started getting serious about it. But still, even then, I just kept them really as pets. I wasn't ever planning to be a breeder or anything like that. So I had a 150-gallon tank set up with various Tinctorius in it, which I would never do now. But back then I'd go to zoos or whatever and be like, "Oh, it's so cool how they do that." I didn't know any better, and the information really wasn't out there. If I wasn't, visiting Dendroboard and talking, none of my friends are into it. And Aaron, when I would ask him, he's like, "Yeah, you can do it." He's like, "You just, if they're breeding, he's like, you don't want to take any of the eggs or anything." I'm like, okay, so. Being 20 years old at that time, I was just kind of going with the wind and keeping them as pets, and then I really enjoyed them. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how even if you just go back to like pre 2008 or 2007, the internet was so sparse. Like it wasn't even like the first thing that you'd go to for information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember I'd go to pet stores and look like Reptile magazine and stuff like that. Yeah, it was. The care sheets that were online for dart frogs, at least, were awful. I mean, it was like you have to use a heat pad, you want a heat lamp, all these things that are so unnecessary, and all the different feeders that they said you should have. I mean, fruit flies were rarely I guess the staple. I mean, everything you're seeing is like pinhead crickets and like rice flower beetle larvae, stuff like. I mean, it was so opposite of now. And it didn't really say the whole bioactive term was not even a thing. And you rarely heard anyone talk about microfauna back then. Yeah, it was wild.
So when you started, I've like, this is one of the things I was gonna chat with you about, because obviously, I mean, your enclosures are amazing. They look beautiful, and I think part of that is probably because you're an artist, and I want to get into that with you as well. But when you started in the early days, what was the setup like? What, besides the kind of the weird lighting and heating and heat mats and whatnot, in terms of like the decor, what was that like?
Well, I think my first dart frog, not the Erotis. I mean, that was actually pretty decent. I think I just had no background. I had like you could buy those like rolls of like a picture or whatever, and I put that on the backside of the paper of the glass, and then I had some little waterfall you could buy at PetSmart or Pet Supplies Plus. It's like a little waterfall, and I did kind of like plug all the edges with like some sphagnum moss. I had a peat substrate, no drainage layer, obviously. No one really talked about that then. And I mean, it was fine. I would hand mist every once in a while, every 2 days probably. I misted heavy, usually in the morning and then at night, and then I wouldn't mist it for a day or two. And I did used to put like it was like I had a 40-gallon like the critter keeper that had like the screen thing that slid out, and I would put saran wrap over top of it to keep the humidity in there. But that was about it was pretty simple. and I had that kind of set up for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And then I saw Black Jungle they were one of the big wigs back then. It was they had everything. So that's pretty much where everybody went. They had a big tutorial on this huge tank they did. And there was the great stuff, the silicone, cocoa fiber, and putting the potters. And then they had like a drip wall and all this stuff. So that one I was like, well, I could do that. So that's where I started. And then I built like a 150-gallon tank, and I did that kind of same exact sort of setup. Still very awful compared to the stuff I do now. But, for the first tank back then, that's when it all started. Black Jungle posted that, and then I was like, oh, okay, this looks cool. So
yeah, I'm definitely having flashbacks to that. I do remember that website. It's pretty cool. So that's the question that with dart frogs now, it seems like like everybody just does bioactive. Every dart frog enclosure I see is this beautiful, natural sort of gold standard care. So I wondered if that, because I don't know really anything about dart frogs besides just what they are. Is that level of care because the frogs require it, or is it now more of just a cultural norm in the dart frog community?
So it's definitely not a requirement. But even that being so people go a little nuts, in my opinion, with it, with all the isopods and all these different springtails. And so like I just recently set up 2 tanks about 2 months ago, and I put 0 bioactiveness in it. I did no isopods, no spring. I have dumped springtails in there, occasionally, just because I know it does help, but I don't seed the tank with them. I just dump some in occasionally. And then, so I was doing a live stream last night, and I pulled off a couple leaves that are on the ground, and there's little tiny mites. There's larvae from fruit flies. I always have like a little feeding station in my tanks so flies don't want to just escape the tank. I put a little chunk of banana in there, and it creates like a feeding station. Basically, the flies congregate there, and then the frogs come and eat them, and the flies also breed on the banana. And then you have larvae, which is really good for some of the younger dart frogs, juveniles, or even froglets. So there were springtails, there were isopods. I had 2 different types of isopods that I didn't put there. So the way that, you're almost going to have a bioactive tank if you want to or not. If you use live plants, unless you're like actually like rinsing everything incredibly well and bleaching them, bleaching plants, that's not who I am. I know there are certain people that are very particular about they don't want Nemerdians or, any nasties, we call them. But a lot of my tanks have Nemerdians, they have slugs, they have snails, that's all natural stuff. Usually if you're using live mosses or live plants, you're going to get some of that stuff in there. And you're going to get the isopods, and which, like I say, it's not a requirement. It definitely doesn't hurt the frogs. It's usually a really good thing. So I think it's more of a buzzword. I use it on YouTube to kind of troll people, because there's people that are just bio this, bio that. And so I'm like bioactively doing this, and I kind of play with it because it kind of frustrates the dart frog hobby, because essentially we've been doing microfauna stuff for 10-15 years, and the bioactive thing is just now becoming this, like, it's a craze word. And it's just like some people are really annoyed by it. I'm having fun with it. It doesn't really matter, but it definitely is a good thing for dart frogs, just because those tiny little bugs, for some of the Euphaga species like Histrionica, Pumilio, Sylvatica, you don't really, at least most people I know, don't pull the froglet themselves and raise it in a grow out. Usually they let it stay in the parent's tank for a few months, and you do want to have lots of little tiny bugs. Sometimes I even put, there's people they throw their fruit fly cultures out after 4 weeks because of the mites and everything. I actually take those cultures and I throw them in the tank, because all those mites gets that little tiny frog eating those mites, and it gets it used to eating, and then it can take springtails, then it can take fruit flies, so on and so forth. So everything, all those little bugs are really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I always I always look at the dart frog community because you guys seem to be doing, in terms of maybe not even the bioactive, just live plants, and doing a good job of trying to replicate naturalistic setups. And
Sure.
yeah, you're right. Bioactive is kind of becoming like a little bit of a buzzword. And then you have on the other side of the spectrum, sort of the ball python community, which is so far away from that. So I was wondering if that naturalistic thing is more of a cultural thing in the dart frog community. And it sort of seems like it is. Like when you get a dart frog, part of that package is getting to create this awesome environment.
Yeah, it can go either way, I guess, with dart frogs too. I mean, like you're saying, was it a requirement? And it's like it's no, but I think for breeding purposes, I mean, you can set up an incredibly simple tank for Tinctorius. You could literally put some substrate. You don't even need moss, just substrate, or you don't even need substrate, to be honest. You could do leaf litter, like 2-3 inches of leaf litter, put a petri dish in a cocoa hut, and maybe even a little water dish,
and they'll survive.
And they'll breed. They'll survive and breed in there. If they're pretty much it's just like anything. I mean, if they're if they're eating, and the humidity is right, which they like it really humid for breeding season. That's why all my tanks are all they have condensation, because I don't have any fans running. I'm trying to get a couple breeding. The extreme humidity and heavy food will just get them breeding. So it's not required, but I think it's cool that you can breed them in a setup which is I mean, it's almost just as much fun, if not more fun, doing the setup and picking out these cool plants, because the plants thrive in that kind of setup. So it's like you can get the best of both worlds. And that's kind of like I have some of my friends, like Mike Titulio, he's a YouTuber,
yeah,
Graphic Phoenix. Like I'm good friends with him. A couple other guys, and they do reptiles and all that. And we always joke, they'll post pictures and like, that's a cool animal, but I mean, the setup is blah, like real boring. And it's just me being like snobby, because with dart frogs, I do think you can get really cool animals, and you can put them in these really cool setups, and it thrives on both ends. The downfall of dart frogs or any frogs, is you're not really supposed to handle them. Where I know with some reptiles, you can handle them and touch them and have them. You can pretty much play with them, which is kind of cool. So that's the plus side of some reptiles, and that's the downside of the dart frog. So.
Yeah. I just love the fact that the dart frog community does embrace that project side. Like it would be really bizarre to go into a frog room and just see like drawers of fairly sterile people that are not even breeding, just like, hey, look at these are all my frogs. It's like, well, what are you doing that for?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I guess the only sterile part that I do is I raise like the Tinctorius, like some of the babies, not the Euphaga species, but the Dendrobates species. I raise in little 120 ounce tubs, and I put paper towel down. I replace the paper towel every 3 days, but I only do that for about 5 to 6 weeks, just to get them well started, and then I move them to grow outs. So that's the only sterile thing I do, and it's a very small part of the frog room, and you really don't even notice them because they're up on the top shelf and they're just kind of out of the way.
Right.
But yeah, and I know Mike Novi. He's in Cleveland, and I've been to his place. He raises tree frogs, and he does sterile. I don't know how he does what he does. I mean, he's got hundreds, maybe thousands of tree frogs, and just a million 10-gallon tanks, and he replaces the paper towel and the water dish and cleans the glass every single day. I don't know how you do. It's a full-time job what he does.
Oh yeah. If you're breeding that many, going sterile definitely is going to save you from some sort of outbreak for sure. So in terms of just your passion for dart frogs, I know you were saying like you enjoyed watching them move, and obviously you clearly enjoy the process of setting them up, but and I assume because you're an artist, just the visual appearance of them is something that you just probably can't get enough of.
Yeah. And painting is my background. And I haven't painted in probably, I don't know, 5-6 years. So I find other outlets, and basically, sometimes I'll just come out in my frog room and I just sit here and stare like, what could I do? So I'm not done with this yet. I still have, there's a rack over here I need to finish. I ordered the glass for it. So I'll be doing those 2 tanks. And then essentially my room's going to be finished as far as frogs I want to keep, and frogs I'm breeding, and no tanks I really want to redo. But I'm already starting, like, I'm already going like, well, now that I'm done, I'm going to have some sort of project. And I want to build like a 6 foot wide by 3 feet deep by 6 foot tall, like huge setup. That's probably wouldn't even have frogs. I may just do like crazy plants and have water features and all that stuff. Where because sometimes water features can complicate things, and you get some unwanted bacteria and stuff that can be harmful. So, and it's also a tank that large is really hard to regulate temperatures for frogs and humidity. So, if anything, I would maybe do tree frogs or something like that. But like I'm already thinking, and I don't know, like I'm like, where would I even put it? But it's like I'm already thinking, like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to have something to do because it's just that's the artist, the creativity. Like I like creating stuff, and yeah, so it's getting to that point where I'm like kind of going slow because I don't want to be finished, and then I'm like, now I got to find something else to do.
That's something that I always try to bring to the reptile side of the world is realizing how fun it can be to create and how much enjoyment you can get from just designing and building it. And the enjoyment, you can get just as much enjoyment out of that than going to an expo and picking up a new animal. Like you can spend 2 or 3 weeks working on this amazing thing and then having it there forever. Like that is something that a lot of people with, snakes, for example, don't do, and the dart frog community does basically across the board.
Yeah, it's and it seems like it's getting more and more people are worried more about the setups and the frogs, which it wasn't always like that. People wanted, and there's still some people that just they want to have every single morph and they want to have as many frogs as they possibly can. I kind of go for I'm picky. I'm very selective on the like if I don't want to have 17 frogs that are all yellow and black, just different patterns, and one may have blue on its feet. That I'm like, I try and be selective on the ones I really want to have, because I have my racks. I've got 2 rows. Could I do 3? Absolutely. Could I do 4? Probably. But I'm not going to be able to really enjoy the tanks on the bottom, so I'm going to have to sit on the floor, which I'm 6'3". I don't feel like getting on the floor and being hunched over. Could I put tanks on the top rack? Yeah, but again, I'm not going to really be able to enjoy it. I'm going to have to get on a little stepping stool or something to feed them and even look in the tank. So at that point, I feel like I'd be packing in tanks and packing in frogs just to have more that I really wouldn't be able to enjoy. So I kind of keep, when I'm sitting down in my chair, the bottom rack, they're at perfect eye level where I can just sit and enjoy and watch. And then if I want to stand up, the top rack, that's where I keep all my Ufaga. They like it a little warmer. So I check all, that's where I stand up and I'm high level with all the tanks. So
Yeah.
I've got it kind of I think I'll have 24 tanks. I think I'm going to have in here, or I have one in the house, the Redhead Histrionica, but so I think I'll have 24, maybe 26 tanks in here. And it'd be like kind of a gallery setup. It's really, I guess, aesthetically pleasing to just look at it and watch and enjoy more than, like a breeder setup, which you're like, I have everything.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely aesthetically pleasing to look at. And so I guess let's jump into this room that you're in, because this is your garage.
Correct.
And that is an interesting idea, because this is like a hobbyist dream that you can convert a garage to a reptile room. And you live in Ohio, so it's not like you're in Florida with perfect conditions. So how did you do that?
So, I used to have just the 3 racks, like these 3 here. I had those in a small bedroom. It was like a 10 by 10 or maybe 8 by 10 bedroom. And then I had a son last year. So my girlfriend's like, well, and I've got a roommate that lives in my basement. So I was like, she's like, well, we can either kick Smoke out. His name's Smoke. We call him Smoke. But she's like, we can either kick him out and you can put your frogs downstairs, or I don't know what you want to do. And I was like, you know what? Because my garage, this is my brother's old house, and this garage, he's a fisherman, so he had these boats out. He was always working on his boats, so he put in a Resner like industrial heater out here years ago. Had a thermostat hooked up, so I was like, yeah, all I really have to do is insulate the attic, because there's an attic on this garage. So I insulated the attic. The garage doors were already insulated. It's got a window and a door, and then I have the heater and the thermostat. So I insulated the attic, and then I would test it, just set the thermostat, to 70, 72. And I, had a thermometer out here, and I'd come in when it started getting cold, and surprisingly, you'd walk in and be like, oh, it's warm in here. Like, what the heck's going on? And then it had the concrete floor, and I ended up replacing that with just some cheap, it was like $500 maybe. The that puzzle piece foam flooring. That gym flooring, and I just did the whole thing with that. Laid a couple rugs down, and that right there, just that flooring if I temp gun the floor, I was getting, if it was cold out, I was getting like 57, 55 degrees, even though the room was at 70. I put the foam down, the floor down, and then I temp gunned it, and I was getting like 65. So I was like, almost a 10-degree jump just from that. So I was like, this is going to be actually really easy. And I was starting to get worried about the summertime because it gets super hot in here. But I had my roommate, his parents, they ended up switching their house to central air, and they had this huge industrial like air conditioning unit that did up to like 1,500 square foot. This is only 500. I think it's like 520 square foot. So I threw that in a window unit, and it kept it perfect out here. So like, it was really, really easy, and I mean, not very expensive to do. Like the walls were already drywalled and everything. So, it was kind of the best of both worlds, and it was a kind of an easy transition. But I definitely was worried at first. Like, I got a lot of money in these frogs, and especially some of the Histrionica and Sylvatica. I think it'd be real sensitive to moving or just environmental changes. They can shut down or die from stress. So I was freaking out a little bit for the first month, but yeah, it was pretty smooth transition, to be honest with you.
And now you have like your desk, and I think you have a TV in there, so it's kind of just like your little hangout.
It's my man cave. Yeah, I collect shoes, and I used to like paint remote control car bodies for people, like the drift hobby, and I'd get super detailed. But that was another outlet for my art. So I have like that little section of shoes and remote control car stuff. And then I've got TV, my PlayStation, frogs. This is my man cave, essentially. Yeah, it's my frog cave. Yeah,
that is amazing. What about humidity? Because I'm sure you guys are you pretty dry in the winter in Ohio?
Oh yeah. So that's why, like, most of my tanks in the wintertime, I usually tape off the vents. Like, my tanks, they all have ventilation at the doors, and they have ventilation up top, so there's circulation, which I want. But I don't tape it off completely. I do probably about 80% taped off, and then I do let some air still come in, so the bad air can go out. But yeah, it gets dry out here. Like my humidity right now is not terrible. It's at 38, but I mean, there's sometimes I come out here and it's 15% humidity. It's super dry. Anything I touch, I get shocked from static. So I do have my reverse osmosis water out here is a big tub, and and I've got a big pump in there, which if it's real dry, I'll plug the pump in just to get water moving to create some humidity. I do have a fogger up on top of the rack too. If I need to run it, I do. But honestly, with how much I missed, that's one of the questions I get a lot. People are like, how often do you miss your tanks? And I mean, I tell them, my answer is not going to necessarily work for you. It's different for every person. I do 8 times a day. So 8 times per 24 hours. So every 3 hours, my misting system goes off for about anywhere from 20 to 40 seconds, which is a ton.
Is it the same in the summer? You keep it running that much in the summer too?
Sometimes I'll adjust it if I feel like it's too wet. But like I said, I usually pull the vents off in the summertime, and I run the fans, so they're getting more circulation and the tanks dry out faster. So even if it's still putting out the same amount of water, all my tanks are drilled. They're all plumbed. So there's never standing water. I mean, the most the water is going to be in the bottom is going to be an inch and a half, and it all runs out. And I have the wastewater just running off onto my driveway. And the wastewater, it's not like stagnant or anything. I'll drain it into a bucket and smell it, and it's just because all the roots and everything just they pretty much clean it. Yeah, they filter that water. So, yeah, that's kind of the whole setup with me and humidity. It's really about the misting system. So,
right.
And I have two advanced pumps is what I have on my system. So
got it. Yeah, it's pretty. So, in each of those cages, are those all made by you?
Not all of them. There's 8 were made by Protein, Jason Perilla or Jason. He's got a couple names he goes by, but he's got kind of an interesting reputation in the hobby. Mainly the dart frog hobby. He's kind of, I don't know, turned some people against him, but yeah, he built 8 of those, and he sells them a ton of people, and I think he's working with PetSmart or something like that. And then the problem with which I like his tanks, they're nice, but the problem with him was waiting, and he's in Maine, and sometimes I'm just ordering one tank, and I know he's not going to make a special trip down here, And shipping, which I offered to I'm like, yeah, I'll pay shipping, that's fine. But then stuff fell through. So eventually I was just like, you know what, it can't be that hard to build a tank. So I went off his design, saw how he actually built it, and then I just kind of made my own adjustments to how I want to build it. And I started building them. Like December of 2018 was the first one I built. And then last year I built like 14 more. The majority of what you're seeing over here, all those are all built by me. The ones like right behind me, those were built by him. And these bigger ones over here, I built those.
I think that's part of the reason it looks so cool, because the enclosures are all match, which makes it just sort of look more symmetrical. But in terms of how you make them, these are just basically just glass. Like there's nothing more than that.
No, I don't do anything special. I use 1/4 inch glass for the actual tank itself. The doors are 1/8 inch. And you just, whenever, I tell everybody, they're like, where'd you get your tank? Will you build me any? It's like, I'm not building tanks. Because if there's certain people that are super picky, like, oh, the silicone's thick there. It's like, well, build it yourself. That's why I'm like, I have a video showing you. It's really easy. So, I just tell people, look for your local mirror and glass store or shop. And, if you want the dimensions, I'll give you the dimensions of how I build them. And you can kind of take that and whatever size you want to do, use that same formula. The glass shop around me, it's around $145 for the glass. And you just want to make sure all the edges are polished. If you want to sand them yourself, I guess you can, but that's a lot of edging, a lot of edges to sand, and a pain in the butt, and potentially a lot of cuts on your hands.
Yeah.
So I just have them do it, and I think $145. That's similar size to like an Exoterra 18 by 18 by 24, and I think they're around the same cost. At least for me, I think they're around $130, $140. But on an Exoterra, you still have to do things. You still have to, for frogs, you need to do a completely different top. You need to get glass cut for that, fruit fly proof. And I just think these look a lot cleaner, and I prefer the sliding door as opposed to the hinged.
Yeah, but, they definitely look clean. There's no edge, really. It's just a sliding glass, everything. There's no big black plastic borders or anything. It's pretty awesome.
Right. Yeah. That's what I like about it. And it's nice. What's really nice about the size that I do on like, your standard like baker's racks. I mean, I get all my racks from Target, and they're around $60. I think they hold up to like 350 pounds per shelf, but I've never had one collapse on me or knock on wood there. So nothing bad's ever happened to me on those, but I make mine 22 inches wide, which two tanks fill up that shelf pretty much perfectly, where Exoterra, if you've got an 18 and an 18, there's going to be a big gap, and it just, you can put something there like I do with like light shielding. You can kind of put something there and make it look custom, but ultimately that's less space you're going to have in a tank that you could potentially have if you do it yourself.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I did. I do the 22s wide, and then these bigger ones here are they're 44.
And in terms of the background,
one tank per shelf.
Yeah, exactly. And so in terms of the background, like do you think partly because you're an artist that you have a better vision for creating these scapes? Because every time I see one of your enclosures, it's like, wow, that's unbelievable. And I assume maybe it's because you're an artist, or?
It could be. I don't know. I've built a lot of tanks over the years. I mean, I did have Exoterra and Zoom Eds, and I built all those, and then I sold them all when I started switching over to the sliders. I've probably done over 60 to 70 tanks of doing backgrounds and messing with wood. So I have experience with it. I don't like using the art thing a whole lot. I mean, because it's like, I feel like what I'm doing, I think anyone could do. What I try to stress to people is on the wood layout, when you're laying out the wood, that's the trickiest part. Balance. Yeah, I use like duct tape and I wrap it around the wood. And then if you look at the tank when I'm doing it, which on my video I did it was like 4 videos ago on the background, I missed that part, and I was mad that I could, because it's a disaster. There's tape going everywhere, like just balancing these pieces of wood up, and then you foam it, and then when it cures, then you can pull the tape off. That's the first piece of wood you put. That's kind of like starting your setup or your layout. So I think that's the most important thing. And it is the trickiest part, getting it to not fall. But even if it does fall, I mean, I had a piece fall in that video, and it didn't really do anything different on the background. It still worked out okay. But yeah, I guess it could be the art thing, but I play with it a lot. I mean, I'm setting a piece of wood, and I'll sit back and look at, just like when I'm sketching or drawing something, you don't just draw it up close and then be done. You have to draw certain areas and then step back and look at it. And if something looks off, you go and change it. So same thing. It's basically, when I'm setting up that layout, I'm basically sketching. It's like on a sketchbook. I do try and stress that to people, that to not just put some wood in and be done and be like, yeah, it works. It could. And it's also funny that the majority of it gets covered up by plants anyways.
Right.
So I stopped being as detailed with the actual carving I used to do. I used to it would take hours, and it looked really cool on initial setup. And then 3 months later, I'm like, well, that's a waste. You can't see it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
In terms of your sort of basic, I watched the background one, and maybe that's how you do a lot of your backgrounds, but basically you're using spray or great stuff foam, sort of big chunks of driftwood. Is that Malaysian? No, that's not. What kind of wood is that again?
Yeah, it's Malaysian.
Yeah. Okay.
I pretty much exclusively use Malaysian. I've used I've ran into a couple people locally, and there's a bunch of lakes in Ohio. We have Lake Erie here. And people are like, I found this great piece of wood. I thought you could use them. I'm like, all right, yeah, cool, man. I'll use it. I throw it in a tank, and then a year and a half later, it's completely just melted. It rots.
Right.
So driftwood, there's the Malaysian driftwood that I've used. There's some that's 15 years old, still holding up. So, it's so dense. It very rarely ever is going to rot on you. And with how much moisture that I'm using and most of the dart frog people are using, I think it's pretty key to use that. I know Manzanita is nice too. That works really well for people. I think some people use dogwood, I think, a lot as well. But I'm exclusive to the Malaysian drift, which the only thing that's not, the downside of the Malaysian drift is it's heavy. So it's a lot of bracing and a lot of great stuff, getting it to sit right. But like I say, you just got to work with it.
Yeah, and it looks so cool once it's up there. Like then once I learned a few things that I thought were pretty cool. One, once you kind of foam the whole back, and you're using this might have been a different video, but you're using the drill with the wire brush to actually clean it up. I wish I had known that when I did one of my other tanks, because it was just taking the razor blade and just scraping the great foam off to get the shiny layer off is so time consuming and so annoying. Maybe you could quickly explain that drill.
Yeah, so I used to do the same thing. I used I just had one. I don't know where it went. Here it is. So I used to use these, like the little snap blades. And they're cheap. I'd buy like 10 or 12 of them for a tank, because once they get dull, it's such a pain carving off that great stuff. And yeah, like you said, it's super time consuming. So I saw someone on Facebook using a drill, and they weren't using like the wire brush. They're using something else, but they were like carving foam with it. And I was like, huh, that makes sense. Let me go to Walmart and see what I can find. Tried the wire brush. Now, yeah, it's just like a forewarning. I say in the video, like, you're going to make a mess.
Right.
It's unbelievable how much. So like I try now, when I do it, I'm putting like duct tape over any vents and like certain areas where the foam's going to be flying, because it gets in your eyes. All over I was like vacuuming this garage, I feel like, for 3 weeks. I kept finding, like, if there's any blankets or pillows or clothes, it gets,
because it's so staticky. Yeah, it sticks to everything.
Yes. But, on these 78-gallon tanks that I did, the 44 by 17 by 24, to carve all that, you're talking, it's going to take me at least an hour and a half. And that's maybe being generous on time. About an hour and a half to carve everything and get it detailed. Where the drill, the wire brush on the drill, it's 5 minutes, if that. And it just makes a mess. But it's so fast, and you're just like, well, that was easy.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing now, on every tank that I'm doing, just because, when you're building a lot of tanks, now if you're just building one display tank, maybe I would do that in certain areas that are like harder to get to with a blade. But if you want to make like certain really detailed, cool areas, you can use both. You can use the the blade for certain areas that you want to really be on display, and then use the brush for just areas you want to just make flat. And
Right.
if you're using the Hydrolon like I've been using, which that's like the mesh that plants grow into it really well. It wicks up water. You want the flatter the surface, the better you're going to get the adhesion. So using that brush to get everything flat is just so much easier than using a blade.
Right. Yeah. So once you have that flat surface of great foam, then you glue the Hydrolon on, and that's actually a product I'd never heard of. Is that I guess in the plant industry or like greenhouses or?
I don't even know, to be honest with you. I know it's.
Do you buy it through like Dart Frog Supply people or?
I get it through Glassbox Tropicals or Mike Rizzo. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he's exclusive to it. Now there is a material it's like the same material, but it's only single sided. You can get on Amazon. It's called like speaker cloth. It just looks like almost like mesh shorts, but it's like a thicker, heavier mesh. And so the Hydrolon has that on the one side and on the back side. Now this speaker mesh is just one side, and the back side is just like it. So it's like if I held up the material, you can see my hand through it on the speaker mesh. If I hold up Hydrolon, you can't see my hand through it. It's much thicker, and so I'm sure both work the same way, but when you do use the Gorilla Glue, it's going to go through that thinner stuff way easier, and you're going to see a lot of the white Gorilla Glue, which then you have to touch up or cut off, and it's also going to make those areas hard, and they won't wick up as much water. So I still recommend the Hydrolon over this other stuff. The other stuff's cheaper, and I had somebody say to me, like, well, what if I just did double-sided, the cheaper stuff to make it Hydrolon? It's like, well, then you're going to be using so much material, it's going to basically be the same cost as Hydrolon.
Yeah, minus your time that you're going to take to glue those two pieces of fabric together.
Exactly.
So that stuff is so cool. So basically, for those who aren't familiar with it, you can glue it to the back, and then it sort of fills in any spaces between driftwood that you might have inside the background, and then from there, the plants will grow on it. Like you get mosses and whatnot to grow right onto it.
I mean, like any aeroids or any vines or climbers, vining plants, they root into it so much faster than like my traditional, what I normally use is just dry lock. Plants still root into that, but it takes a lot longer. I mean, you're talking, you'll start to see Margravias and some of the like climbing plants will actually root into the dry lock maybe 5 months down the road, 4 to 5 months. You'll get a little growth and then they'll start to take off. But Hydrolon, I mean, it's like a week. You'll start seeing it because it's constantly wet and the roots just go right into it and then it starts climbing up. It doesn't look, it looks very unnatural at first. And, I had someone like, I don't like the look of it. It looks unnatural. It's like, well, yeah, it's going to look unnatural until the plants grow into it and then you can't see it. And that's ultimately what your goal is, or most people's goal is.
A mature setup, you wouldn't see it at all, really. I guess the plants completely cover it.
Yeah. I mean, there's people that, they're like, I don't like the look. And then I show them a picture. I'm like, do you like that tank? And they're like, that tank looks amazing. I'm like, that's all Hydrolon underneath it.
Yeah.
It's just very easy to. There's certain tanks where I haven't done any driftwood in the background. I just do foam, Hydrolon, and then I'll set wood in the back, like on the foreground or on the terrestrial side of the land, and then lean it against, and the plants take over, and it ends up looking really cool. It looks like there's wood integrated in the background, but it's actually not, just leaning up against there. So
that's amazing. So let's chat a little bit about in terms of what you're using to care for them. So what about lighting? So let's start with that.
I do very budget. I've tried the skylight. I had the guy from Skylight reached out and was like, hey, would you be interested in trying it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll try it. He said, make a YouTube video on it, give me your honest opinion. Don't, I'm not like I'm not sponsored by them or anything. So it's really nice lighting for my situation. And I would say it's really nice lighting for what I would say a single setup or a display setup, because it's pretty expensive lighting. For me, it would cost thousands of dollars to light my tanks, where I have all 22 of these ones lit for about $300 total is what I spent. I use these, I use LED shop lights, and I get them off Amazon. They sell them in like 6-packs for $110 maybe. Some tanks I use, the fixtures are like basically 2 bulb, and it's the size of like a T5, but it's just LED, and it's not an actual bulb. and you don't see the strip. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's 6,000 to 6,500 Kelvin temperature. They're really good on. I think each fixture is like 42 watts. Where before, when I was using a quad T8 fixture, each bulb was 32 watts, and I had one of those quad on every single shelf. So I was using. I mean, the wattage was way higher before. And my plant growth with these LEDs is fantastic. It's cheap. I can't recommend them enough if you're on a racking system. They're just so versatile, and you can daisy chain them. So I literally have I use these. They're called genies, and it's basically those little smart plugs. And I can use timers on the phone. It's got a timer in it itself. So I have one light plugged into it, and then there's about 10 to 12 fixtures plugged in off of that, and then I have another on that wall. I have one, and then all those are all plugged in off it. So you're not using all these different light strips and power units. You don't need it. It's just they're very low power, low wattage, and really good results with moss, bromeliads, orchids, everything. Very versatile and very cheap.
So is that it for lighting? Like for dart frogs, do they need supplementary heat, or is just the heat of the room is good? They're a cooler species.
Yeah, room temperature is fine. I turned my thermostat down in here so the heater wouldn't kick on while we're doing this for audio. But I keep my room around 70 degrees. It may drop to 68 at night. So yeah, they don't need it hot at all. Now, certain species like the Oophaga, mainly the Oophaga sylvatica and histrionica and lamani, I do supplement them with 5% UVB. And so with my tanks, I don't have like a UVB on every tank. I use a bird lamp that's got like the flexible neck. And I actually open the door, stick the whole unit inside the tank, turn the light on, close the door, and then tape off the gap. And I'll leave it in there for a half hour, 45 minutes a week maybe. Because there's no filtration. I mean, they're getting direct UVB. There's no actual data if it's actually helping them or not, but it's not helping them. I guess I can say, it can't hurt. And it's just like I say, 30, 45 minutes a week on each of those species. I've heard people say that the UVB really helps red frogs retain that red color. 'Cause you'll see a lot of the red frogs in the hobby. They kind of fade to an orange, like red lamani and some of the really stunning species you'd see in the wild that are red. Here they're like a really pale orange. But people that do seem to keep them in captivity with that nice red color, they stress that they use a lot of UVB on them. But like I said, I mean, there's no real data on that. That's just hearsay, basically.
Yeah. I hear you. So, and then what about substrate? Because I've seen you do a few different things with substrate. One of the more interesting things I saw you do was just use a foam block. But maybe you could talk about that as well as just what you use in other tanks.
Yeah. So there's pretty much the gamut behind this. I mean, I have got I've got grow stones as a drainage layer, and then ABG as a substrate. I've got the egg crate false bottom with ABG as a substrate. Then I've got the Hydraton, the clay balls, the clay pellets with ABG over top. So most of the tanks I have do have the ABG substrate. And I use the one from Glassbox Tropicals. I think theirs is the best quality. And it's the actual, some people call ABG when it's not Atlanta Botanical Gardens' actual formula. They kind of make their own and call it ABG, but it's not. So Glassbox uses actual ABG formula. I've used that for years, and with it's really good for humid, moist setups. So it worked really well for me. I've never really had to replace it. But yeah, recently, like the new tanks I've done, I use that it's like a pond filter foam basically. And I got the idea. It's not like my idea. I didn't come up with this, but the Dutch poison dart frog people, like Dutch Rana and some of the bigger names out there, I'd watch their tanks of like how they build and the progression, and you'd see the background progress and you'd see it all come together. And the ground the whole time, you'd see this like weird looking like mesh foam type of thing. And then in the completed tank, you would see that level wouldn't really raise. You would just see moss or leaf litter on top. And I'm like, all right, there's no way they're putting substrate. You'd see, like, I would look and see, like, you would see the background shrink, and it wasn't shrinking. So I'm like, and then I went on their site and they sell this stuff called dendromat or dendro, something like that. And so I started looking for it, and it's the same exact texture and the same exact stuff. So I'm like, if they're using it, surely I can use it. So I tried it in the newer tanks I've done, and I absolutely love it. My microfauna, I'm not going to say bioactive, my microfauna is doing really well in there. And yeah, most of the plants that we're all using, they're all, aphidic plants where they don't need soil. You don't need to dig a hole, shove the plant in there and bury it and let it grow. I mean, they all kind of vine and climb. So you can, like, people are like, how do you plant your Markravia? I'm like, I throw it in the tank. That's what I do. I literally throw it and it grows.
Yeah.
You don't need to plant it. So, I put moss down, some leaf litter. I would pin, like, with toothpicks, plants to the Hydra so they start climbing. And it's been really good success so far and really good results. And what I do like about it most is water features. If you do want to have a water feature like I did in these last 2 tanks, it's so easy now because you don't need to worry about substrate dirtying the water, making it brown and nasty, because there's no substrate. It's like water hits the moss, filters through, it hits the foam, the filter material, and you have clean water. You can run a pump in there. It's really easy to cut a hole in that material, set your pump in there, and basically it's filtering. It's a filter, so it's filtering that water to the pump, and it's really easy to carve. It's like, I don't know if you know what Metalamat is, but Metala is like it's similar, but it's really hard and it's got way bigger holes and it's a pain in the butt to carve. This stuff is like, it's almost like great stuff to carve, how easy it is, maybe even easier. So you can manipulate if you want to have like a stream or a pond, or you want to have front, like you just literally carve it at an angle. And then, like, I laid down Java moss and Rickia moss to grow because they're aquatic mosses. So pretty much that transition from water to land, it looks like natural. It just looks, it's really nice. And it opens up, your viewing, so say you have a 24-inch tall tank and you're used to doing a drainage layer, substrate layer, leaf litter. That's about, on a safe side, 5 inches of that 24 inches of viewing gone because you just see dark. And then, so now you're talking, you've got 19 inches of height for viewing or for plant growth. Where with this, if you plumb the tank low enough, say I plumb it at 1 3/4 inches, water's not going to go above that. The mat, that filter material, is 2 inches. So I'm going to have 1/4 inch above the water. So, it's never going to get waterlogged. The moss or anything won't get soaked. And from the very front of the tank, if I'm doing water, I have 24 inches of viewing. There's nothing that's like, I guess, obstructing my view. From the bottom, I have water and I can see whatever little water fleas or little bugs are in there. And then plants, and you've got, instead of 19 inches of growing space, I've got, 20, 22 inches or even 23 sometimes. So it just opens up the viewing so much more. Like when I sit back and look at the two newer tanks I did next to some of the older ones, it's not even close to which is more aesthetically pleasing to look at.
And the moss completely covers it, obviously, so you can't see it at all.
Yeah, and there's people in the hobby that say the moss does nothing for dart frogs, which, they've got a point. Leaf litter is you're gonna have more microfauna on the leaf litter and more hiding spots in the leaf litter, but moss does retain moisture, which is nice. It retains humidity, and it looks awesome. Everyone always, you see a tank full of moss, someone's like, where'd you get your moss? How do you grow your moss? If you put a tank of leaf litter, no one's like, those are awesome leaves. Where'd you get those?
Yeah.
Moss looks cool. So what I like to do is do moss and leaf litter. And I'm pretty sure in nature, it's not just leaf litter. There's leaf litter and moss and sticks and rocks. There's everything. So, you get both sides of it. I try and play the middle. And I don't like telling people they should do something a certain way. I say, if someone's like, I'm all leaf litter, like, awesome. I'm glad that's working out for you. And I do my thing. I think everyone needs to, you can take ideas from people and bounce them off what your mind's doing. And ultimately you do what works for you. And that's what I've tried and stressed to everybody is, well, that works for you. May not work for them. Do what works for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, do what you like. And in terms of the moss, I think this is a question you get all the time. Is what is the moss that you're using? What type of moss?
There's multiple. Mainly what I use on the ground areas, it's a low growing tropical moss. I got from a guy who lived in Hawaii. Um, I don't know if he's still selling to people or not, but I haven't been in contact with him for a while. But yeah, so it's a low growing tropical moss and does extremely well in terrarium conditions. And then he's also got, I get a lot of questions on, it's a Ricardia species. It's basically a liverwort. It's not a moss, but it gets lime green. It stays really, really short. And it just, when it covers wood, it looks just so natural and just really awesome. So those are the two most I get questions on. But if I'm doing like a lot of times when I initially plant a tank and I put the wood up, I use Java moss because Java moss grows insanely fast on driftwood. It does really well, but it can get a little stringy. It gets long, so you got to clip it and trim it, with time. It's not my favorite moss, but I will use Java moss if that's all that's available to me when I'm setting up a new tank. I'll use Java moss, and there's times it depends on the height you have it at and how much light it gets, how stringy or how low growing it stays. So you just, like I say, you got to play with it, and if it works for you and you love it, you love it. If you don't, rip it out and try something else.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the plumbing that you have on these, so obviously they all have so a bulkhead or a drain at the back. Are they all feeding into the same? Like, what are they draining into? You mentioned it earlier, but I wasn't sure. Is draining into some sort of reservoir that you take outside to dump?
No, so it just runs. I used Mist King lining, like the tubing. I use 1/4-inch tubes, and then I use the Mist King bulkheads that they use for their misting systems. And so I use a 5/8 hole is what the misting system heads fit through, and then also the bulkheads. And then I just have the lines all tied into each other using little Y unions, little 1/4-inch Y unions, and so they're all just daisy chained together basically. And then there's once I've got them all tied together, then there's just one leg that runs out under my garage door and right onto my driveway. So it just drains right onto my driveway every day. Like draining is something I never have to worry about unless one gets clogged and I see the water level get high. Then I'll usually unhook that spot and just try and suck through my mouth to whatever's clogging it. Yep. And that's all I need to do. So, but mainly I'm never concerned with draining. It's just something I don't have to think about, which that's why I like the automated system with the lighting, the misting. Those are things I really don't need to think about unless I need to fill my reservoir with water.
Right.
And so I have an RO system.
Yeah, for the water, are you just making your own RO? You just take tap water and then create RO, and then that's what you use for the system?
Yeah, and so I don't have running water out in the garage. I have my RO systems down in my basement, and I have all that water feeding into all the RO water. Feeds into a 30-gallon trash can, and then I have an auto float valve. So when it fills up, the float just tells the RO system to stop making water. So I'm not, always making wastewater, which is nice. And then I have one of those genie plugs downstairs hooked up to a big sump that you'd use to drain a basement, take the basement flooded. And I just turn it on, and I have a 100-foot hose running out the basement window, and I just hook it up in here and fill. This is 20 gallons. I fill it every probably 4 or 5 days. I have to fill it up. So yeah, it's all pretty much automated, but yeah, it can get a little tricky when because I just leave the hose out there. I don't but in the wintertime, it can freeze. So I'll have to bring the hose in, let it thaw out, then run it back again. And that's
right.
But summertime, I usually just have it always just set up so I can just plug it in, turn it on, and fill it up.
That's awesome. And then
I'm
you
lazy.
said you have, that's the way to do it. Automation is the way to go. And do you have foggers as well? You had mentioned that you use foggers, or is it just kind of an occasional thing?
I have one. I'll run in the room occasionally. I have set them up. I just use the Vicks ultrasonic, or it's not the Vicks humidifier, just to cool air. And I mean, I'll use go to Lowe's and I'll bring the actual humidifier in and mess with fittings to see how I can get fittings and tubing. I like this kind of tubing. It's that flexible tubing. It's got
it's like corrugated almost. Yeah,
because you can bend it. Where if you're using just regular silicone tubing or just the rubber hosing, I mean, it kinks. so the fog won't go through it well. So I do plan on incorporating the fogger in the next 2 tanks I do, because they'll probably have. I like the water features now that it's not complicating things. I do really like it. I think it really adds to the vivarium. So I do plan on incorporating them. But yeah, it's just there's no like science to it. I'm still playing with the ideas.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, Troy, thank you very much for spending the time with me. I know that on YouTube you are close to 10,000 subscribers, and you've started a contest. So maybe we'll wrap up with you because I think you're at like 9,600. So by the time this gets posted, you're probably pretty close. So maybe we can finish with you just letting everybody know what that is, and then encourage them to participate.
Yeah. So I'll just real quick on YouTube. I've been posting videos for about 12 years. I never thought I'd have like a following. I have like a little cult following, I think, but
like 12 years is a long time. That's like way before anybody was doing anything on YouTube.
Yep, it's been a long time. And the videos for a long time were just very, very low budget. I'd shoot them from my phone, upload right onto YouTube. There was no editing, no post work or anything like that. And then last year, about a year and a half ago, I started really focusing on doing some editing and making the videos more enjoyable. Because I feel like I do have a lot of knowledge with the dart frog hobby that I can share with people, and I'm just trying to help people. So started doing that. My subs went from like, I don't know, 3,000 from the first 10 or 11 years. I had 3,000 subscribers, and then now I'm almost at 10,000, which is just nuts to me. So as a thank you to everybody, once I hit 10,000, I'm doing like a free dart frog giveaway. 2 Dendrobates tinctorius of their choosing from my collection. Not my adults, not my breeders, but just froglets or juveniles or something. So, and yeah, it's a contest basically. It's going to start once I hit 10,000. Although I'll put a video out letting people know about this, so some people have already started, and they're like, "Is that okay?" I'm like, "That's fine. It's not a big deal." I just don't want someone entering a contest with the tank that's been set up for 18 months. It's like that's not fair. So you're not going to see a difference for 3 weeks really, but. So yeah, 10,000 subscribers, that's when it starts. And then it's going to be 3 weeks from that time. I'll announce, once I hit 10,000, I'm going to announce, the dates of submission, and I'm having a couple of my friends help judge it that are not, one's in Canada, one's in Ecuador, 2 of my really good friends. So they're going to help me judge the initial 3 finalists. And then I'm going to post those 3 finalists onto onto Instagram. And then I'm going to have, the fans vote to see which one gets the most votes, when the start time is for the voting, when the end time. I'll have all that stuff ironed out once I hit 10,000 and I make the video for that. But I think it's a really fun way for people to get creative, stretch some ideas, and really, we'll see what, all the viewers out. Because, there's so many viewers out there that don't post on Facebook. They don't post on Instagram. So there may be someone out there that's like a vivarium genius that's just creating these masterpieces that gets on there and, blows everyone out of the water. And it's like, puts them on the map, and, they get some cool frogs out of it and exposure. And ultimately, all to require to be in the contest, you've got to be from the United States. You've got to be the continental United States, I should say, 18 years or older. And, the start times, like I say, it's got to be within the appropriate time. And that's really it. I think it'll be really cool and a fun idea. Oh, you do have to be subscribed to my YouTube channel and a follower on my Instagram, so people can just screenshot that and send it to me on Instagram, and they're qualified. So
yeah. Well, the thing I love about it is it's focused on the environment and the build and creating this amazing setup, a naturalistic setup, rather than who can have the coolest animal. It's like, let's see who can do the best care job, and then you get the prize of the animal. So which is exactly how I think the entire hobby should be directed to. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's a dart frog setup in particular, which is cool. And then me and 2 other people that I consider experts really, we're going to be judging it. It's not, you could have the most expensive tank, most expensive plants, wood, and all that. And if it's not executed correctly and it's not a good setup and doesn't look good, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
You won't be a finalist. So someone could set up a 10-gallon tank that's just incredible and be like, that's amazing, and that's really awesome for a pair of dart frogs. And they may win. So it's not really a budget thing. it could be, it's really about the execution for the setup of a dart frog that's going to be judged on. And, aesthetics is going to come into play, but also just, have the actual enclosures set up for dart frogs to thrive in there. So
yeah, awesome. Really cool. Can you let everybody know your Instagram as well as the YouTube?
Yeah, so my YouTube is just my name, Troy Goldberg, and you could probably type in Troy Frog and I'll pop up, or just type in Troy Goldberg and you should see something with frogs on there. And then my Instagram, it's similar to Oophaga histrionica, but it's OOFROGA, like Oophaga, and then underscore, and then histrionica. Instead of histrionica, it's histrionica. So Frog Troy is hidden in Oophaga histrionica, basically my play on it. It started as a joke. I said it to someone like, dude, you have to do that. That's hilarious. So I have a sense of humor for that stuff, so I just made it. Yeah.
It's awesome. And I mean, the Instagram page is fantastic because you get to see the real good pictures of all the enclosures and everything. So it's I definitely recommend going to follow it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, dude. It's awesome.
All right, that brings us to the end of that episode. Troy, thank you very much for joining me. That was great. I really enjoyed learning about the dart frog hobby and where you came from and sort of all those different tactics and methods that you use for creating such beautiful enclosures. I will definitely be copying some of those and using your videos to create some awesome enclosures for sure. Thank you guys very much for listening to this episode. What do you think? Do you think the dart frog people are absolutely crushing the reptile people in terms of their care? I think in a lot of ways they are. It's part of the package of owning dart frogs, and I really hope one day owning other reptile species is part of the package as well. Part of the package is creating these beautiful naturalistic environments. Dart frog people are doing an amazing job at that. Definitely go check out Troy and his Instagram and his YouTube page. He does lots of live streams on Instagram. I see him at least a couple times a week. I feel like doing a live stream on his Instagram, and he gets to interact with his fans, and he of course has the 10,000 subscriber competition happening right now, so definitely go check that out. If you did enjoy the episode, make sure you share it on Facebook or Instagram or share it with your friends and family. I always appreciate that. A rating on iTunes or the Apple podcasting app is always appreciated as well. If you'd like a shirt, animalsathome.ca/shop. You can pick yourself up a sweater or a t-shirt, and $5 does get donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. And thank you very much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Links are in the show notes and the description. I will talk to you guys next time.